welcome back, everyone. I hope you're refreshed and at least energized by the sugar and happy. So welcome to session 2 on enabling evidence uptake. For those of you that don't know, I think I have one of the best job titles in the What Works education. I'm the Education Evidence Interaction Advisor. So hopefully for the next hour, you can all adopt my job title, and we can all think about how we are supporting evidence interaction. And then hopefully take a little bit of that to go back to my day jobs after today. So yeah, we heard kind of during day 1 of the conference about the really exciting research plans you'll have. This morning we kind of had a bit of your elevator pitches about how your vision and kind of how we're working together. And now we're going to do a bit of a deeper dive to think a bit more about how we're supporting evidence uptake. And we kind of hope that by the end of this session, we'll have a bit of an understanding about some of the different innovations that we are collectively working on across the hub to support evidence uptake and use. Have a bit of a discussion about how we can learn from each other and where maybe we kind of need to be doing more, kind of where we're reaching out. And I think there's a real challenge for us as a program. We are, as a program, trying to understand implementation of education reforms, but we also therefore need to be understanding how we are implementing as an initiative kind of together, and thinking about some of this science of evidence uptake and being reflective on that. So it would be good as well during the discussion for us to be thinking about maybe actually where are some of the learning agenda for us as we are reflective practitioners in this, and where we can be thinking about where we can do some more so that we are learning from our approach and developing that and maturing in how we think about evidence uptake and some of the piping and infrastructure behind that over the lifetime of the hub and beyond. So we have prepped lots of our partners to come up. We're going to give you 5 minutes each to kind of present some of the work that you are working on, and maybe some of the learning ideas and where we can get together. And then we're going to have hopefully a nice discussion around the room. You can ask, obviously, we're going to do questions after all of the presentations. So kind of save up your ideas and kind of make a note, and then we can do that in plenary at the end.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you, Laura. And I think, Maria, you're kicking us off again with the first presentation.
Right. They should be coming up. All right. Yeah, moments. All right. And I probably want to take 5 minutes for Keep and 5 minutes for P-Square. This one is going to be combined, and kind of leveraging some of the learnings that we've had in both experiences. So I think we know quite a bit of things about the evidence uptake. I think we looked at the room. I'm sure everyone could contribute in terms of what we have learned over the last few years about evidence uptake. So I'm just kind of summarizing a little bit on what we have learned, and this is a little bit informed by a study that we did for P-Square on evidence uptake that we looked at in January, but also some of the other learnings. And so what I took is just kind of looking at the kind of flow from evidence generation to dissemination to use and to advocacy. And what are the different components that help with evidence uptake. I think many times we all focus on the middle piece, the orange piece, which is dissemination. We're looking at how can we disseminate better, and that can be either through better communications messages or through better synthesis and that kind of thing. So I think that's where over the years a lot of the emphasis has been. But I think we've also learned that we really have to start at the beginning with the evidence generation to kind of, if we have better locally informed evidence and evidence plans, I think it's more likely to be picked up later. And similarly, to also look at the evidence users in more detail and getting more directly involved with the evidence users So some of the things that I think over the years, we've also different parts of we have been involved in, for example, creating the South-South coalitions and partnerships, and really helping countries in low and middle income governments from low and middle income countries to work more directly with each other, learn from each other. You know, I know that several organizations have like taken governments from one country to meet with governments from another and done these visits, or like the South-South coalition that went to Brazil to learn from Sobral. So I think those kinds of things are just really important with increasing the likelihood of evidence uptake. And I put advocacy at the end, you know, it actually is in different places, but I think it's also just quite a lot of initiatives going on about promoting with governments the importance of evidence. And so I think we can't underestimate that, or as Luis said, with the media, you know, to help them understand how they can use some of the evidence that's getting generated. So I think, you know, that kind of helps us, at least us, to think about how we can increase evidence uptake. And so here's just an example from the GEEP in terms of what we have learned. Definitely one of the key takeaways for us is it takes lots of touch points with whoever the audience is. You know, I'll primarily talk about governments, but it's the same with teachers, if that's, you know, the main audience. And so what we have done is created a mix of different touch points. And that starts, for example, with high-profile conferences and webinars like the Education World Forum, meetings with government officials, like those side meetings where we take the delegation, mixed channel communications, and then the ed labs, for example, working directly with ed labs. So Kwame, for example, has taken the Smart Buys report and has given it to his team in the ed lab, and they are contextualizing the findings from the Smart Buys report and adding additional local evidence to it. And so I think it's just having these multiple mixed channels, and Charlie also on the call from our team from communications. So obviously communications is really important. This is just kind of a few pictures from some of the events. So I think it's just really important to bring the government or whoever the main users into those conversations, be it you know, a big teacher conference in Tanzania or some of the other places. So just a few takeaways with that. So thank you.
Hi, everyone. I'm Eli Bush. I'm the Academic Director for our English and School Education work at the British Council. I'm based here in the UK. And wait a second for the slides to come up. So I'd like to start just by telling you a little bit about the British Council for those of you who aren't as familiar. Our overarching mission is to support peace and prosperity by building connections, understanding, and trust between the people in the UK and countries worldwide. And we do this through 3 different areas of work. We do it through education, through the English language, and also through arts and culture. And within the work that we do with education and the English language, we work at all levels of the education ecosystem through our work in implementation, our research work, and also through policy engagement. And as Michael said earlier, we work in around 100 countries. We're on the ground in around 100 countries around the world. In terms of the What Works Hub focus countries, we're just completing the recruitment at the moment of these full-time senior stakeholder engagement leads in India, Pakistan, Rwanda, and Tanzania. And we also have some part-time program managers that we are recruiting or almost finished the recruitment of in Ghana, South Africa, and in Kenya. And our colleague in Ghana will also be overseeing some of the activity that's happening in Nigeria. And as well as this kind of dedicated team that we have for the What Works Hub activity, they're also supported by our country directors, by our fantastic country teams that are already in place, by our regional colleagues, by a full-time program manager who's based in the UK, and also by me as a senior responsible for the British Council. So what exactly is our role in the British Council? How is this team of people going to support the What Works Hub? In a nutshell, as you can see here, we are fulfilling the role of an advisor, facilitator, and a convener. And in terms of the theory of change, we're going to be supporting the pillar of work that's focused on improving government and implementers' ability to access and use the evidence, while at the same time, we're also going to be delivering in-country events that will bring together the focus of all three of the pillars. So what's this going to look like? We're going to bring together policymakers and policy implementers and also practitioners to engage with new and existing evidence. We, along with everybody in this room, is going to be providing the What Works partners with expert knowledge around the education system, the structures and the realities within each of the focus countries. We bring really deep relationships at all levels of the education system, along with an understanding of the context. And this has been established through decades of experience and the long-standing presence that we have in all of these countries. In everything that we do at the British Council, we're really focused on listening and looking for the mutual benefit for all of the different parties involved. And we really understand the importance and the influence that culture has on decision-making, and the influence that it also has on those factors that will affect whether something that works will actually work in a different context. We're also going to be drawing on our experience of implementing high-impact, large-scale education initiatives ourselves to improve learning outcomes, and the knowledge that we have of all the challenges that there are in the gaps between policy and implementation. We'll be helping to build bridges between and within the research community, with the government structures, the implementing bodies and organizations, and also, as I said, critically, the practitioners. We have a really good track record at the British Council of translating complex ideas and evidence into language that different audiences can understand, and really thinking carefully about what their priorities are and tailoring that to what we're delivering to address those and also any concerns that they might have. Finally, we'll also be acting as secretary to the steering committees that are being set up in each of the countries of focus. And that means helping to frame the agenda, making sure that we have the right people in the room, and also really critically keeping that conversation going in between those meetings and also after the What Works Hub program has concluded. So the specific activities that we're going to undertake, they range from less tangible activities, so being the focal point for the different multiple players within these countries and trying to join the dots between all of them, to the more tangible activities like the events, the evidence events, and policy dialogues that we'll be helping to convene. We're really experienced in putting together high impact events, getting, again, the right people in the room, curating the content, and then thinking about how we can move just beyond the logistics of talking through things, but how do we take things forward and out of that room. At the Education World Forum each year, we'll be curating a series of wraparound activity that's based on the What Works Hub's outputs. And then finally, we'll also be working closely with BSG, with the SCDO, and with all of you to support the strategic communications about the Hub's activities in general.
Hi, everyone. My presentation is going to be consistent with some of the findings that Maria was presenting, being based on the ground and local context, also the Global South leadership. And I want also to thank the World War Hub for Global Vision for the invitation for this week. It was a fantastic week, very engaging. But I'm so happy to go back home because I cannot say no to the English breakfast and my colleagues don't. Increasing so much that really that's bad for the rest. So I'm going to present on embedded labs. I'm the senior director for the embedded lab program at IPA. And how we think about embedded labs is as teams that are within the government that implement a learning cycle, a process that has 3 steps. They first identify what are the policy challenges of a sector in a specific country. They translate them into research and learning questions. In a second step, they implement research and learning agendas. Depending on the nature of the question, it could be descriptive, predictive, it could be monitoring evaluation and learning strategies or causal. And then they facilitate in a first step the use or the sharing and the use of those results. And then because we want this process to be institutionalized within the government, we co-design with the government 4 lab components. As I was saying, the process, it has to be adapted to the context, to the needs of the government, structure and a governance, meaning like a team and the stakeholders that will be involved in this process and what are the roles and responsibilities. Then we enhance capacity in the system to enable the process. So that means both at the individual level, like skills and knowledge, but also at the system level, like information systems. And then we work with the government on devising strategies to allocate resources in a broad sense to sustain this process and structure. So that means financial resources, but also legal frameworks to incorporate the lab into the organizational structure and political support for advocacy towards the lab. And the way IPA established these labs is, as I was saying, a co-design process with the government in which we embed staff within the government structure. And we generate a lab team that is composed both by IPA lab embedded staff, but also the government staff. And together they co-design and they start implementing the learning cycle. So they start to have this policy impact. In the beginning, IPA is leading the activities and the government is learning by doing. And as they take more experience and learning, then they can take that leadership on the lab and IPA phases out. And IPA becomes a partner with other organizations in the ecosystem for the lab. So this model, what allows you is to have 2 levels of impact. One at the policy level. So the lab is able to promote the scaling of evidence-based policies and implement them well at scale. And the lab is also helping to improve the system in a way that enables a routine and institutionalized process for evidence use. We work across the globe. We have 24 lab engagements, 10 of them in education, across 16 different countries, 8 different sectors. We have so many questions. So we have a learning strategy and we take our own medicine. So we have a cycle for it. We have a learning agenda that is both enunciated at the country, program, and global level. The global level is with you. So we share questions with you that we want to address. We have learning strategies that have been combining different ways of learning. So convening counterparts like cross-country learning exchanges, community of practice, but also we have monitoring evaluation learning plans at the lab level for each of our labs, so we can aggregate that data and learn across the different portfolio. And then we have research projects that we conduct to understand different dimensions of labs. We translate that into toolkits, publications, and we also provide technical input, technical support to our global partners in implementing designing labs and to our country engagements, and we contribute to global debates through this learning process. This is one of the convenience strategies that we had, the cross-country learning exchange. We did one in Uganda last year. We convened 12 ministries of education labs, and some of you were there, so thank you for your contribution. Some forthcoming products that we have is an institutionalization guide. So we have been thinking about how to do the institutionalization process of a lab. So we are putting that in a framework and a guide. We are also releasing a report on the embedded evidence lab theory of change and progress. And we are thinking on our next exchanges. So we will be reaching out to you for your participation. Questions. We have so many questions. Again, this is just a sample. So funding, system and policy impact takes time. How can donor funding strategies be aligned with lab implementation timelines? Contextualization, different contexts require different solutions. So which approaches are more effective in various settings? Mechanisms, what changes do labs create in the system to enable use of evidence? And how do they introduce those changes? Impact, what decisions and actors inform different types of research services? what does impact look like for each of these services functions. So what is the role of the lab in scaling evidence-based policies, governance? How can urgent requests be balanced with long-term agendas? And how can government and ecosystem agendas being coordinated, which we already discussed a little bit. Thank you so much.
What I want.
Sorry.
So that allows me to move on to your ideas a bit more. You got some slides? Okay, good. So I don't need to introduce the Ed Labs concept. We've been talking about this, I think, for many days now. So I'll unpack a little bit, maybe pull up a bit of why we're doing this and build on what Juan has said about going forward. How can we win together? Okay. So when we started to think about the Ed Lab concept, we actually looked at the literature out there. First of all, what is an Ed Lab? What are the key things that the Ed Lab is trying to achieve? And why do we even need these Ed Labs? And we wanted to boil it down to a few things that we think are critical to the concept of an Ed Lab. And there are four of these. One is these are demand-driven entities. These are not about the supply side, although they do have a linkage to the supply side of research. They're evidence uptake entities. So the evidence uptake is the end point. And yesterday I was making the case for why these are actually political entities as well, because they have to have visibility into the education reform process, into the policy-making process, into how that lands all the way down to the district level and classroom. So they have to be embedded in the conversations that are happening at every level. They also have to have a clear line of sight, which is they have to be the ones that are actually informing the process, not just sitting off to the side, producing data or producing research. They actually have to be at the table when policy and practice is designed. And then they have to have the skill set that Juan knows very well. Didn't get to talk about it very much, but the skill set of translation. What is that skill set? That's not a skill set that we've codified very well. How do you sit at the intersection of research and policy? And that's a unique skill set. We commissioned because we were actually looking at how do we do this thing? What are the examples from around the world that we can build on? And we commissioned OTT on think tanks. Clara was in the conference this week, so you may have caught her. She and her team produced a report that looked at policy labs. If we were to look around the world of global north, global south, everywhere, what are good examples of what a policy lab is? And we landed on this definition, which we're continuing to iterate on, which is the multi-partner coalition that brings together ministries of education, subnational educational authorities, research institutions, and practitioners to promote the use of evidence in policy practice. So it's a mouthful. We might have to shorten that. Maybe you have a better definition for one. But the idea being that this is the way that I like to describe it is a clearinghouse that actually filters what goes into the policymaking process from research and evidence perspective. So they're intended to be the kind of the holder of the research agenda at the country level and are able to navigate all the things that are happening in terms of commissioning of research, the data that's flowing up and down the system, and are able to filter that up and channel it into the policy process. We also looked at, and this might be familiar to many of you, what is that spread in terms of the sorts of Ed Lab mechanisms that exist as it relates to the embeddedness piece. So the IPA model, correct me if I'm wrong, Juan, is all embedded within government. Different units of government, but it is within government. There are Ed Labs out there though, and we're funding some of those that are actually outside of government. And the reason for that is there are different systems. For example, take the Colombian system where we're funding an Ed Lab, highly decentralized system. Decisions are happening all the way down at the district level. So the Ed Lab is actually a distributed model that brings together different entities that's not embedded in central government. So this is a bit of it's a simplified version of what we're looking at from government, fully embedded, all the way to outside of government and its independently run unit. So there are Ed Labs around the world. We looked at about 60 of them, and there are many more, and they're all spread across this continuum. Now, the ones that we're funding, In Cote d'Ivoire, we're working with IPA, we're funding MPA in the Cote d'Ivoire lab. And that is probably the one that has progressed the most. So it's embedded within government, it has its own line budget, and it's actually fully kind of operational. Ghana, we're working with many of you on the GID lab that is now being set up in a ministry. And in Colombia, as I said, is a distributed model as it is in Switzerland as well. So these are distributed consortia models. We've started to look at, okay, all of this is happening and we're learning, but what are the key questions that we have building up what IPA has put together of what are we actually trying to test here? So essentially we're testing a modality of knowledge translation. So this is not something that we have validated yet. We don't know if these ed labs are all going to succeed. Probably not. They probably will not all succeed. But what we want to test across the world together with partners, so this is actually an invitation for all of us to think about how do we actually do this together. We're seeding these kinds of models. They all have different kind of institutional setups. How can we learn from them collectively so that we can build a more comprehensive knowledge base as to how to do translation? So these are, I won't go through all of them, but these are some of the questions that we're asking ourselves. They're very similar questions to what I think what Works Hub has put together as well. We're looking at institutionalization, at how ed labs can be politically relevant, but not captured by the politics. And they have to walk that fine balance between the two. How do you fund them for sustainability without having to be dependent on philanthropy or bilateral funding? And then how do you make them relevant to the short-term decisions that governments have to make while building the long-term research capacity of the country? These are all big tensions, and we don't have answers to them, and we have to collectively look to address them. And I'll end with, many of you were at our wonderful steps somewhere in Marbach together almost a year ago, where we actually brought together a group of us who talked about many of these things for several days. And where we landed on is, could we build a common evaluation framework or an evidence framework for ed labs? Effectiveness framework, for example, is another idea. Consolidating the global evidence, a repository on ed labs. And then we have some pretty ambitious ideas that we're discussing of a peer learning sharing community and an ed labs learning fund, where ideally we could actually, now that we have 10 plus 4 plus however many, we actually have several ed labs where we're experimenting with this model. Could we test, test research on, build research on research and create a more consolidated science on translation? Thank you so much, and look forward to discussing this more. Last but not least, we have Amy from LGI.
Hi everyone. So I've been asked to talk about how champions can be effective change communicators. And on this conference, we've had a lot of analogies about the importance of science. The way that we see champions, and I guess we've worked with champions, is to communicate the messages along those pipes so they get to the right people at the other end, and so that the people at the other end can take them on board and listen to them. So what I just wanted to share was some reflections from our experience of having 26 commissioners to now having 9 LPI champions that we will use through the What Works Hub to really communicate the messages coming out of this initiative. Firstly, I just wanted to reflect on how they have been effective to us in our work. Then I'll talk about how we can improve, how we work together, and then what we're thinking going forwards. So firstly, how they've been effective. So they can engage at the highest level. When the Learning Generation report was produced in 2016, Commissioner President Kikwete met 14 heads of state of African countries to talk about the evidence and the research in that report. And when I met with the Minister of Ghana, he always said to me that the reason he was really willing to work with us, without knowing us before, because he had dinner with his president to discuss those findings in the Learning Generation report. And that initial kind of conversation then led to us co-designing a complete restructure of the Ghana education system, which is now being implemented at scale. scale. So it really opened the door. The second thing is that they can provide inspiration. You know, it's a really tough job being a Minister of Education. There are some really tough decisions and challenges. But when you're speaking to someone that's been in that position, you can talk through things with them really practically in a peer-to-peer way. So, for example, at the Education World Forum this year, we brought Mayor Gomez, the Mayor of Sobral, to the Education World Forum. He met many delegations, and I think they really enjoyed both being inspired, but saying to the Minister of Sierra Leone, said, he really like being able to say, how did you tackle teacher training? How did you tackle assessment? And like being able to have that both inspiration, but also really practical conversations. The third point is that they've been really good at building credibility through their shared experience. Like, these are people that have achieved things, you know, they've got a vast amount of experience. They've often held high-level positions and been through system change. So another example is this summer, one of our LGI champions, Raza Jamil, went to the East Africa conference in Arusha. And she met with the Kenyan delegation. And because she has that credibility and lived experience, she could deliver, you know, key research messages to them in a way that they could, you know, pick up and understand quickly. The fourth point is about their networks to influence agendas. Because the champions aren't just individuals, they come with all of their connections or all of their networks of this lived experience. And one way that has been really important for us is now we've got Lisbeth as one of our champions. And through her connections with Board and Ground, we're still able to have a seat at the table at the Global Education Forum and reach those finance ministers. So thinking about, you know, who do you want to reach and how do you reach them through networks has been great. And then finally, they also really help us make sure evidence reaches the people we want to meet. So we held a policy dialogue in May on innovative pedagogies in Ghana. And because our champion, Professor Joseph Anamua, is a highly respected academic, he led TESA in Africa, he's got lots of experience in professional development. Because he was going to chair it, it meant the minister attended and brought his whole delegation of government. So that meant we could actually speak to the people, you know, in the room. We had the whole variety of stakeholders in the room, but we had government in the room too. So that's been really important for us. So those are some of the things, and actually to Lewis's point, in our first set of commissioners, we had Shakira as one of our commissioners. And one of the things she did do was brilliant on media. Like through her, like we had, I don't know, millions of Facebook followers and things like that, but she was able to attract media attention. So also thinking a bit differently about who to speak out and where you want to reach. So that's a kind of more outlier example. But what we learned is also that it's not, if it was just champions, we're not sure it would actually lead to action. So for us, where we've had most impact in Ghana and Sierra Leone, it's been the champions opening the door, it's been the team following up and building lasting trusted relationships, delivering high quality work that's actually led to implementation and impact. So there needs to be the champion and the team. The second thing is that we really found that when the champion is passionate about the thing you're wanting them to communicate about, they obviously communicate much better in a much more engaging way, and they're much more committed to giving time. And you'll see that the reason we've gone from 26 to 9 champions is that we thought it's much better to work with 9 people who are really committed, willing to give the time, than 26, some of which, I guess, more high level, almost tokenistic. So that's that rationale. What we did realise is we had lots of anecdotes, and I've just given you anecdotes in the first slide about how they've led to impact, but we had no systematic way of capturing that. So that's been a really important learning. And finally, just making sure we have a diversity of voices to speak to different people about it. So the next slide is just saying, so we tried to look at the evidence on champions, and Rosie produced a report they released in January this year that looked at 6 different typologies of champions, you know, what's effective, what could be done differently. And they gave us some guiding champions to think about how do we work with champions going forward. So how do you make sure they're co-creators? You're not just involving them at the end, giving them a message, but you're involving them in the journey. What are the potential short and long-term impacts? how do we deepen the impact through continuous engagement? So they're not just pitching and presenting at a conference, they're actually having more engaged conversations. And how do we measure and sustain impact? So going forward, we're going to try a much more engaged approach in the 4 focus countries I said we work in. We're going to suggest a mentoring relationship between a key reform champion, where they meet monthly, they talk about things that the reform champion wants to talk about, and have a much more ongoing, deep relationship. And you can see a few other things there. Just a final comment. In reflecting on champions, I think it's important for all of us to think about who are the champions at all levels in the education system. Who are the missionaries that Rukmini Banerjee talked about earlier, so that we can not just deal with these high-level champions, but champions at all levels to take lead.
Thank you to all our speakers in this session. We have about 25 minutes left. And what we'd like to do is offer about 10 minutes to ask any questions directly to the speakers, but don't worry, I won't make you all come back up here. And then we're going to pose a question to the group, and for each of those tables to have a discussion around that question and feedback at the end. So first 10 minutes, just opening the floor to questions, reflections about any of the topics. So your hand up first.
Just a broader question as to sort of how does, the work hubs and the ed labs and all of this relate to the liberology school of thought and the literature that was generated around that? And how is this similar or different?
Rachel, can I jump in? So I think what's quite exciting about the fact that BSG won this bid is that they also, you may not be aware that they also led with LGI the whole research program looking at different delivery approaches. As some of you will know that the UK government put 300 million into a delivery approach in Pakistan, put money into one in Tanzania and different countries. And we really, a few years ago, just thought, my goodness, we're putting so much money into these approaches. Are they working? And we need some robust research. I mean, a bit like Donica calling for us to do research on our ed labs, but we just need some research around them. And you've got the best expert here in the room, and Judith will probably want to come in, because Judith and Asia were both there in the core of what happened in Pakistan. So, but I think what's exciting is that we've got experts. And one thing that I was witness to last month, Lewis, was Amy managing to very quickly for us bring one of the, somebody who's been involved in some of that research, Jamil, over to the African Union conference to talk to us, rather skeptical government director of policy and planning, who one had met the week before, to talk to them about, the pitfalls of delivery approaches, but as well as the importance of having dashboards and ed labs, but what could also go wrong. And he was absolutely raptured. He hadn't been that interested in hearing anything from the academics or the others, but when he was hearing from somebody who, lived, was from another context where they'd had them and used them, he suddenly wanted meetings, and then he wanted the next breakfast meeting, and he wanted, he was hungry to learn from that evidence champion. And I think it talks to something very important that I think, certainly in the way I've resourced things, have been perhaps a bit naive to how powerful it is, that actually, as what I sometimes call super communicators, south to south communication is often very much more powerful than northern expert to southern country. And I think we need to think and reflect a little bit more on that. But I don't know if that answered your question, but Judith might want to come in as well, perhaps.
So amusing anecdote, which actually does relate to the things that we discussed, was I was the senior education advisor in Pakistan at that time, and there was a fight, and I use that word, please don't quote this outside of me, between World Bank and the Liberology Union about the data. And it was a very professional. So, but what that meant is when we're working in India, we made sure there was an evidence advisory board, an independent evidence advisory board to quality assure the stuff. But I think it's more about connections between the different models we've heard. They're not going to be that radically different. They're just going to have more intensity. So the focus on learning champions, I think, is really, really interesting. because I was in a meeting in India where it seemed to be these very aggressive meetings where the mid-level officials were really, really angry about the structured pedagogy, not about the lesson plans, but about the time of delivery of those lesson plans. And the champion, and they literally looked at the champion who used to be in the Indian central government to say, what is your advice? And that just neutralized the emotion and led to actions. So I think might be a really good study that the What Works Hubs can do is to say, how do the things that we've heard about connect together in a coherent framework, and how does it add value to implementation in country level?
I just had a couple of comments. I mean, I think we were so thickly embedded in the deliverology theology, and it was hard to step back and critically analyse what we were doing. But I think having stepped back, although the UK government is obviously looking very, very closely at deliverology again, there was the political relationship between the deliverology expert, in this case, Sir Michael Barber, who'd done it all over the place, but was doing it in Pakistan, and Shehbaz Sharif, now PM, extremely effective chief minister, but they worked together hand in glove, identifying a few critical enablers of improving education, and that was electricity, water, bathrooms, and boundary wall, focused on getting girls into school, because they said if every school has those and we deliver those at scale, the theory of change was that will then improve access and moving through to learning outcomes. It encouraged a rigorous approach towards data, and it meant that there was regular management and responses to the data that were coming through for sort of real time on the ground. There were real perverse incentives, though, because there was not enough attention paid to perhaps the evidence leading to the selection of those items to be delivered. Were they the right items? And then secondly, was there any account taken of where people were starting from and where they got to? So the people at the top of the class were rewarded, those at the bottom of the class, even if they came from the poorest, I don't mean the children, the poorest districts, those with the most ground to travel, those with the least resources, the greatest number of challenges, were deemed to be failing, which was a critical failure of the approach. So lots of positives if we can tease out the advantages and really course correct around the perverse incentives.
Yeah, just to add, I think it's a good also note of caution that we shouldn't say ed labs are the solution to everything from the outset, and kind of and I think actually that was even reflected in some of your remarks, Danica, to say that we're kind of, there's a spectrum, it could look this way, it could look that way, we're going to try to study it as we do it to see what's working and not working. So I think it's a good, I don't know if this is what you were alluding to exactly, Louise, but to kind of for us to say, we don't have all the answers. We're going to try this, we're going to try it this way, we're going to try it that way, but we shouldn't pitch it as a silver bullet that it's going to solve all the evidence uptake challenges, and see and learn over the course of the next few years what's working. So yes, noted and good to learn from the deliverology experience.
I think this is such a good question, because I did worry about this too. Are we now yet in another cult of BLM cult? Because we do have to, every few years we swing in one direction. Okay, we're all going to do just that. So I do think that what Works Hub is such an important mechanism to actually build a very robust learning agenda around this, and to be critical of our own work. Apply the same expectations that we have of everyone else on ourselves. And that's not easy, because it comes with consequences of how we actually deploy funding, allocate resources, and that's something that's not to be underestimated. If you want to be truly a learning organization, you have to actually walk the talk. And that's not the easiest thing.
And I think just to say on this, we actually have some really great opportunities under the What Works Hub. Like in Rwanda, they are actually just establishing a delivery unit that's going to be monitoring their new national foundational learning strategy. We also have the embedded lab there, and we're talking with the British Council about how their convener role kind of might be linking some of these two together and focusing on actually how are they effectively working together. So I think we've got some real good opportunities. Questions for the group?
I also wanted to highlight, there's also people on the line as well, so please, if you have any questions, please do raise your hand.
So it's a comment and a question, and I'm asking this question because there are superpowers in the room. So, and I'm only saying this from India context, I'm not an expert on any other country. So I heard in the last 2 days a lot of things about government participation, getting their buy-in, but there is no talk about demanding government accountability or government stake. And given the kind of people in the room we have and this consortium of partners, can we demand that of the governments that we are working in? Because I'm thinking about my union minister in India, which is Dharmendra Pradhan. Are we just going to bank on the evidence that we give him and his goodwill to take this up? I'll cut my right hand if we have this. Honestly, it won't. I'm just saying it really needs to be, because that's how you can support the academia. I mean, with the kind of combined voices to influence the government, that if they don't do this, it's dire consequences. And I'll just end on Noam's analogy. I'm married to a merchant navy officer, so I know what I'm speaking. It's fine to change the rudder, but it takes a hell of a long time to get it back on course when you're talking about a large container. And India is a VLCC, it's a very large commercial container, which is like very huge. So if it goes on the wrong track, it's going to take a very long time for it to come back. So I feel the crew at the ship, the captain who's the union minister and his crew, the mid-level officials, need to feel the urgency that if they don't get this right, a lot is at stake. And that's the messaging that also needs to happen. Yeah, thanks.
I'm enjoying the continuation of the analogy. So
I think there was a hand over here just before.
Okay. Are there any questions on the line before I pose some questions to the tables? No? Well, I'm going to kind of ask you all to reflect, I think, on a question that Donica, you put forward in your presentation within your tables, which is to really think about what one thing we can do as a hub to learn together and really kind of come up with a concrete action from each table. So I would invite you kind of within yourselves to have a 10-minute discussion about that and come up with one key action, and then we will share back to the room. So over to you to have some conversations. We've got 10 minutes left, so if it's all right, I will ask tables to get back. So we can start with the far left table. And you can nominate somebody, yes, please, nominate somebody to feed back your key action of how the hub. If you have one, that's it.
Yeah, it's sort of an action. We agreed that intentional communication is key to help us learn together. So we need to be talking to each other with purpose, almost over communicating perhaps at the beginning so that everybody gets a sense of what's going on, and then we can work out who to talk to. But also as part of that intentional communication, there was a point made about the importance of challenge for learning together. So we need to be able to challenge each other to make sure that we're delivering what we are committed to deliver for the hub.
I think that's a really important point. This table over here, would you like to feedback? Mini table of three.
So I spoke last, and suddenly that was okay. You go there. And it actually ties in neatly with this, actually, because it builds on the communication. If we are going to learn on evidence update, and we are going to be engaging with governments on evidence uptake, and it's really important that we have that respect for each other's work and the coherent voice when we are speaking at country level. Doesn't mean we all have to go with just one thing, but that coherence and that respect and understanding of what else is happening and how these things align and complement is really important.
Thank you. Got this front table here. Sabina, you're looking very reflective.
We didn't really get to the bottom of it, but I feel like I can try. I guess we were reflecting that the What Works Hub has there's a lot going on, and there's lots of different activities. And I think we're conscious of the big challenge, so it's a kind of, in some ways, a scattergun approach to trying lots of different things, to building the evidence and kind of building capability, and then, building this field of implementation science. I think one thing we reflected on is there's a risk that all of those things could happen like really well at activity level, but maybe it doesn't add up to the outcome. And we need to kind of know which pieces of the puzzle are most important, and even challenging ourselves on which of those bits are most cost effective. Even like, is it the one meeting that you can get through having a champion go and meet someone? Is that the crucial piece or not? And I think it's going to look different in different countries, but we need to, maybe there's an opportunity to in the real focus countries within the What Works Hub, trying to understand how different pieces of the puzzle fit together.
Absolutely. Everyone's nodding, so I think you did well. This table over here.
Hi, everyone. I'm Deborah Greben from USAID. So we did not come up with one idea. We came up with a few ideas. One of those was that even though I think we're converging around some big things that would have a longer time horizon, there's also a need to get some momentum here and to have some quick wins. So I think a common thread throughout what we were talking about was simplicity, or something that's kind of a little bit more manageable to bite off, at least at first. A couple of ideas that came up were even just a very simple idea of us on a quarterly basis, all putting together kind of bullet points about what we've been working on, and then share those out via email, just so that we have more visibility about what we're all doing. And then also this idea of what we're trying to learn. We know that the What Works Hub is already collecting some information through a survey, potentially to develop some sort of joint learning agenda. But even just coalescing around a couple of key questions that we all agree are questions that we want to generate information on or gather our learnings on, and being able to kind of report out what we're learning on a regular basis. So yeah, key thread being some simplicity here, at least to start and get momentum.
Thank you. You challenge the remaining tables to have more than one action.
It's nice and as productive as that table. Wow.
Fine, your table. Any key actions?
Well, we were reflecting mainly on kind of learning agendas, I think, and USAID has got its learning agenda and IPA's got its learning agenda. And obviously there's lots of partners that we'll have there. So thinking about kind of where's the overlap and the complementarity between those, whether or not we can come up with something that we share in some way, but also recognizing that it's kind of, well, particularly for an organization, maybe less so for an initiative like What Works Hub, it's kind of a political statement as well as a management exercise kind of thing to actually respond to those. So is there anything else that we covered? And then we also have a What Works Hub Mel partner, which will be coming on board in the next 5 to 6 months or so. So that will be another resource that we can all draw on to kind of further this kind of learning objective.
Yeah, absolutely. Final table here.
I'm not sure we answered the question, but we had some good discussions. So I think one of our questions was in terms of common agendas at country level, and being really specific, what is that reform that we want to move the needle on? And I think there are 2 dimensions to that. So one is, what's the foundational learning reform? Like, what is the outcome, as in children's learning, we want to receive? So are we all going to work together on structured pedagogy, teacher professional development, whatever it is? What's that? But at the same time, there is this other learning agenda about ed labs or evidence into research. And I think we've just got to make sure there's a balance. That's all very interesting, but we've also got to work with government to shift the needle on the policy outcome we want to receive. So I don't know if I'm trying to think how do you kind of make sure they're all working in the same direction? And then we discussed it's not really a ship, but it's like a flotilla. We're like all a ship. We've got to try and get to that, whatever that outcome is that we're trying to. Feel free to add, if that makes sense.
Thank you, everybody, for the rich discussion. I wanted to maybe kind of
see if the table back there and had any final thoughts, and maybe you can then segue into your next session.
Sure.
As we're on 12 on the house.
Rachel, do you want to say?
Sure. I mean, first, just in terms of really, I really resonate this thing about good communication, and I think you used the term, Rebecca, over communication at the beginning. You know, making sure we're really sharing and are clear. And I think there's a couple of things already that are in plan that I think respond a little bit. So maybe Laura can say something. Laura has been working super hard on creating a joint team site actually, so we can share documents. I don't know if you want to say anything about that, but also the What Works Hub team, and Chenge's at the back there as well, but have a newsletter. And I thought your point around, well, actually as strategic partners, could we share a few bullets on what we're all doing that could be curated into and go into Chenge's fabulous newsletter. So that's also a nice, more public way, you know. So there might be some internal things to share, but there might be some that we want to share more broadly.
Yeah, and I all resonates, and I agree. This point on quick wins, I think, is something worth reflecting on, so we can demonstrate concretely what we can do as a coalition, as well as the kind of big long-term visionary wins.
And then I think some really good points there, kind of Rachel, on kind of ways of working and kind of, I guess, getting a balance between thinking about how as a room kind of we are working together as a partnership and kind of initiative, and some of the things that we can do to support that, but also to bring a global learning agenda and some of the global goods we want to be producing. And just one of those things actually directly that Amy was talking about, we will be having some country level theory of change workshops in the 4 focus countries between now and the end of the year. I think lots of save the dates have gone out, maybe not necessarily to all of the people in this room, but yeah, they watch this space, but I think there's some more information on those, and actually really coalescing around that question of what does success look like in the countries that we're working on in the next 5 years? Where are we going to be working together so that we can start to think about, yes, our global agenda and kind of what we want to be doing as an initiative, but also what does this look like country, and how we may be bringing some of those together.
If I could just add a comment, I was very struck by what Danica said. You know, now it seems like research and research is becoming the new vogue, and everyone's trying to get their angle on it. But you know, stay in the spirit of quick wins. I think it could be very powerful if the group of funders said we're agreeing to we're all going to put a small percentage of our funding into a pool, which will support some initiatives which will cut across all the countries, and maybe fund some global public goods that we could all benefit from. Just to show that we're trying to go towards convergence and really, marshaling our efforts.
It was actually really exciting being in this session, because I was thinking about what is it that we're trying to do with the Gates Foundation? What are others doing, and what are the connections? So I think that flotilla analogy is really, really good, because that's all about communication, direction, and which ship and which boat is better at doing what. And I think we work with that, and if nothing else, if what the What Works Hub has done is allowed better coordination, resulting in better impact at the country level, that would be an amazing. So I kind of got more excited during this session. On a Friday.
What a fabulous thought to finish on. And I'm going to hand over to Noam to take us on to the next section on research initiatives.
Thank you. We're going to switch up the order a little bit. So Marla, you can come up from the base side.
We just ran out of time.
Yeah, we'll hear from each of a few different partners on very specific efforts that they're undertaking. And again, we'll want to come back and draw the connection. So we'll start with the bank team, and then we'll go on to the next. I might suggest, just to keep it dynamic, that we, right after each presentation, folks can ask a couple questions or clarifying thoughts. Because it's a bunch, and then we can see if we can kind of begin to bring it all together. Marla, over to you.
Thanks so much, Noam. Hi, everyone. I'm Marla Seaback. I'm an economist with the bank, and I'm leading on the implementation science project that we're doing in partnership with the Hub. And what we're trying to do through this initiative is embed implementation science alongside World Bank operations. And this is a very unique opportunity because we work financing government projects. There's a huge opportunity for leveraging this grant support to come alongside the government programs that the World Bank is supporting and financing. So We've already committed about $690,000 in grant funding. That's leveraging an additional, the $1.1 billion of bank lending across the 3 projects that we are funding right now. This initiative was launched just over the summer. And the 3 teams that we're supporting are working right now in collaboration with some colleagues at the Hub to design implementation science projects alongside their operations. So to give a quick summary of the 3 places that we're currently working, in Ghana, the team is focusing on the role that coaches can play in helping to deliver a differentiated learning program and increase uptake of the differentiated learning curriculum in Ghana that's underway. In Rwanda, the team is focused on supporting the rollout of the curriculum that's been designed for remedial education. So the government of Ghana, Rwanda, has designated Fridays as a day for remedial learning and is developing a curriculum for that day. And we'll be looking at the rollout of that curriculum. And in Nigeria, we're looking at the rollout of a structured pedagogy program. We'll be focusing on one state in the north initially. Because we're going to be getting started quickly, actually looking most likely at the readiness of the system to take on the structured pedagogy program so that we can feed into how they think about the rollout when they do so. So the model that we're adopting is to collaborate with our in-country teams to identify implementation challenges that they see coming up in their programs, to think about answering these questions with a right fit evidence solution. So process evaluations, qualitative work, hopefully the opportunity for A/B testing as we move forward together, and then having a very rapid way of adjusting the implementation in line with the findings of the work. So we're very excited about this initiative. Like I said, we're working with Kate and other colleagues at the Hub right now to design these research plans. And we're particularly enthusiastic about participating in the harmonized instrument development that's going on at the Hub. So our teams are keen for the thinking of the Hub about what is it that we can be measuring in implementation? What are the kinds of questions that we can be answering in a light touch way that move alongside an operation and then can be feeding back into making improvements as we go. And then, also getting support with analysis as well. Looking ahead, we're excited about standing up these research projects, but also excited about the kinds of resources about how we've done this that we can generate and share with other teams. So it's not just about the teams, that we're working with grant funding, but also how we share and diffuse these lessons across our other teams and other regions within the bank as well. And sharing that evidence back with other Hub partners and also within our organization. And of course, we're also looking ahead to additional grants that we can make. So we've got the 3 that we've stood up right now and looking to make, with the current resources we have, an additional 4 to 6 grants over the course of the next 2 years. So that's the summary of the big work. Looking forward to engaging with all of you.
Thank you. Well, you can stay there. Then people will ask. We'll have 3 minutes for Q&A. Or I don't know, Luis. I think Marla actually had 2 extra minutes. So is there anything else you wanted to add? Okay, you're happy. Okay, so Q&A. Any thoughts, questions, quibbles for Marla and Luis?
Just a comment that we should talk later. We're also going to be doing research with our country office and the government in Ghana and Rwanda along similar lines. I know our country teams have already discussed, but it would be great to compare notes and make sure that we're fully aligned. Tom from UNICEF. Thanks.
It's super exciting, and I remember when you presented the range of possible opportunities, and it feels like there's loads of demand. Were there some key questions, key implementation challenges that were coming up across the different programs? Because they're very large scale programs, such a huge portfolio. I'm just wondering if there's some key issues that are kind of emerging from those in terms of implementation issues that the TTLs are really challenged with, that could then help us to sort of, build beyond. Because in a way, the implementation science has a real learning agenda attached to it as well. Maybe not yet, but
yeah, no, I think we're in the thick of it right now. I know some of the questions that I'm most excited about, but I don't want to speak on behalf of others. I think thinking about for me, the role of the changes in tasks that individuals within the system need to do at scale is something that I'm very interested in. So the questions that the Ghana team is asking about, we have these officers in our system already
who've had a supervisory and support role. And as part of our reform program that we're undertaking, we're asking them to take on a coaching role. How are they doing that? That's already started to happen in theory. And what the team wants to do is go out and say, what's the variation across the country in the way that these officers have understood what they're being asked to do? What's actually taking place? What's working? And then are there recommendations that we could, things that are bubbling up, not recommendations from the top, but actually practices that are happening, in districts by these officers that we can think about diffusing more across the system and nudging that along. That's not an insight. That's just my perspective on one question that I'm really interested in, and I think that we might find threads of that looking across some of the other countries in the future. But I'm excited to report back in a few months what some of those are.
A question that, along the lines, I suppose, of Emily's is not just other key questions, but I think for me it's, could we use this as an opportunity for having some common tools and some common methodologies? And one thing I'm always so impressed with USAID about is the things like how you manage to get in your institution cost captured and get guidance for all of your programs. And you seem very good and very systematic around it. And I think as other big agencies, the bank and FCBO, we've got a lot to learn from how you go about and how you do that. And I wonder if there's some exciting opportunity here where this could be somewhere where we use some common measures. Barbara's call earlier around, we've got partial observations, we've got measures, tools and measures.
Yes, sounds great. No, I mean, I think, I think, Rachel, maybe more concretely, our program's not focused on the cost measurement side, but we are very keen on the implementation measurement. And I think one thing that's been encouraging is the enthusiasm, the willingness on the part of our country teams to say, saying to us, if you have a tool for measuring implementation, we're interested in that, and we're interested in using it as part of our own tracking and understanding of how things are progressing. And I think also speaks to something that we were really thoughtful about in the design, which was wanting to focus on aspects of projects that are a priority for the team. So part of what I think is going to make this a successful project is this is a service. I see this as a service that we are offering to the country team to say, how can we help you understand what's going on in your implementation and improve it as you go along? And we're thinking about it in that mindset. And I think that some of the tools that the hub is designing will hopefully support that.
And Michelle will actually, at the end of this session, present a bit on common measurement thinking that we've been doing. And the bank team has been really great, and all the partners kind of thoughtful in engaging on this and trying to roll it out across the effort. So we'll see the degree of take up. And one of the great aspirations, also to Emily's point, is we are hoping to measure implementation real time to enable course correction real time, so that the kind of there's that real time innovation, adapting, learning. So we'll see if that's successful, but that's the aspiration. Thank you. Oh, one more question.
I guess maybe not a question, just a comment. I think that there's just a real opportunity with these grants, and actually the UNICEF ones as well, when we are thinking about how we're implementing with government. The focus that I think that you've taken in the grants is that, there are already activities where you're working and partnering with government, where there are delivery linked indicators, hopefully linked to sector plans for those. And I think that there's a challenge for us when we think about some of these implementation measurement issues, like how are we working with government systems using some of their data so that they are understanding how they are implementing kind of the reforms with bank funds, UNICEF support, other things coming in. And I think that as we're thinking about kind of what additional we might need, and that what support we can provide through these grants and through some of the additional research capacity that we have, but also then thinking about how are we building some of the capacity to enable governments to then take some of those tools and to be using them.
Great, big round of applause. Thank you. Yep, that is USAID. That's all. Yeah.
All right, so I don't have slides. That you have to look at me. So I talked to my daughter last night and she asked me, are you having fun? Is it exciting? And I said, oh yeah, I like my job right now. And she said, well, do you like it enough to wear your pink suede shoes in the rain?
Very lovely.
I actually want to pick up on something that you started, I think, Donica. So I'll talk about our research initiatives for a small organization, 60 countries, 350 million board members. But I want to talk about our research initiatives, but I also want to talk about kind of like a broader approach. So I'm going to take a page from Donica's book. I think we're only going to get this done if we're willing to be introspective and critical friends of each other and of our work. So I'm going to describe our research work, but I'm also going to highlight what we cannot do, right? So even with as a large bi-level funder, we cannot do this well. So first, so I'll talk, we're not funded by the hub, but I'll talk about a lot of our research initiatives that are in the same space and where we can collaborate. So one is SHARE. This is a holistic, actionable research, and you guys are going to have to test me on if I can actually remember what the acronyms mean. You can only be USA staff if you can acronymize anything. But this is really built on our learning agenda. So we have a cross-sectoral learning agenda that cuts across not just youth, foundational skills, higher ed, and conflict and crisis, but it's cross-cutting across all of our technical and priority areas. So gender, inclusion, ICT for E, system, private sector engagement, like all of this intersects. And SHARE is designed to help us advance the research in the areas that we really need to. So right now we're launching 12 multi-country studies that are looking at youth skills, foundational skills, youth, conflict and crisis, social emotional learning, and it's all implementation research. So we're just starting that work, so finding ways for it to be used and collaborate with others. So that's an ask, right? That we definitely know that there's an overlap, but critical friend. What kinds of frameworks should we be using? Where should that research go? Or studies don't make, a conclusion. Where does that connect with all that? Second, Decode. Decode is a large initiative that is, and I'll just highlight one of the work streams, really strengthening evidence ecosystems. USAID has a really important priority of localization, and one of the ways that Decode operationalizes that is saying it's not pushing research down necessarily, it's also bringing research up. So how do we empower local researchers, universities to see themselves in the broader research agendas, but also in the broader evidence ecosystem? And how then do we make the research go up and down more effectively? There, the big ask is, it really is, there's implementation research, there's really the capacity and strengthening the capacity of evidence users, and how do we then synthesize a lot of this research? So also tools that we don't need to create from scratch. Oh dear. We have 2-3 youth mechanisms that are generating quite a lot of youth-led, cross-sectoral, positive youth development research. All again, more implementation research. We're closing one of them down actually tomorrow. Where does that research go? Right? Where is it going to sit? Where is it going to land? It is the largest undertaking of youth-led research. It needs to get out there. We can't do that alone. We have LGBT, Leading Through Learning, global platform. It's networks. It's our networks of partners, networks of NGOs, networks, the Global Reading Network, Conflict and Crisis Network, Higher Ed Network. Again, those are links that we can also share with them. We've catalyzed, which is a really, it was an innovation, that's right. To really think about how do you catalyze private sector investment in non-state schools, but also in just generally in education. Lots of great work at community levels, getting banks interested in supporting their local school systems. Pilots, right? But where does that research now go? What are we doing? And last I'll mention, FLAIRS is a brand new award that we just did. It's for implementation research. It is to Brink, which I know Gates is also has an award for before. So it'll be expanding on the. So I just want to say, you know, I think the big question in all of these research initiatives is really that upstream coordination. And I think to your point of like, are you all going to put all this together and make it work? Because we all have pieces of the pie. So I think that's a great point, and that's the upstream coordination. I think that's really necessary so that we're not, you know, at the country level and our country teams are like, well, our framework is this and your framework is that, and now we're at odds of how that all comes together. So.
Thank you. Yes. Let's do Q&A so we can continue. Yes, thoughts and questions for Hental. 3 minutes.
I'll read everything about you.
So maybe I'll ask one.
Okay.
Can you share some specific strands where you're seeing most connections within Share? Maybe some of the others too, but Share, I know. Sorry, Decode. Decode is one of the closer ones.
Yeah.
Give us, if you can give 1 or 2 examples where you're seeing the most synergy.
And this Decode, is that an acronym as well? Decode?
Of course.
So it's data ecosystems for development and education.
Ooh, great.
Do you want to answer?
Oh, yes.
Rebecca is the COR of Decode, which is basically
I'm responsible.
buck stops with her.
Okay, so there's one that is like a call for proposals. Apologies, I've shared this with some of you, but where we're looking to give small grants to local researchers or universities or organizations to synthesize the evidence that's there, if it's there, or some data that maybe they've been, you were just mentioning some data they've been sitting on, or disseminate it in a way that's useful in that context. We've been talking a lot about the back and the piping, but that's really Donica has led that. We are just able to contribute to figuring out, or can we agree on a series of meta tags that then we can all use with all the research we're producing so that it's easily findable. Another one is a network resource hub, which is, we want it to be shaped by this group, but it has really strong ties to some of the global goods that were produced, the ideas that were collected at Marbach around community center, or I can't remember all the words, or there's a resource center and like a community directory or something, like it's kind of emerging of those ideas. So there's lots of things we're able to contribute to that if they're shaped by this group can be much more useful than if we just do it by ourselves. We're really looking for that collective shaping of those things that have a lot of similarities to the goals.
Thank you. Wonderful.
Sure. I also don't have slides. That's okay. So my name is Tom Dreesen. I'm an education manager at UNICEF and Agenti, the Global Office of Research and Foresight. I want to talk to you a little bit about like where we're coming from, a little bit about the work that we do, and then also where we hope to go. So a little bit about where we're coming from. So UNICEF, as you all probably know, is a large UN agency working in 155 different countries in terms of education programs. And it's very decentralized program where countries make decisions on what they want to do together with governments, and that's the way we think it should be. In terms of UNICEF and Agenti, our education team at Agenti is actually quite new. We've only been around for a little bit less than 10 years, And what we've seen is we've seen a large growth in kind of demand for research supporting our country programs. And so we've done research over the past 5 or so years in more than 40 countries. And in particular today, I'm going to talk to you about some of the research that we've been doing that's embedded within our country program. So trying to build research, a lot like our colleagues from the World Bank, trying to build research into education programs that are going on in country. And so I did the tally this morning. At the moment, my team is engaged in research in 23 countries around the world and all of our different regions. And I think that's important because I think it shows that there's this pent-up demand and demand that's in the countries that are the usual suspects, but also in a broad range of countries. And the other thing that I think it shows, and it's something that Noam, you said yesterday that struck me, is like culture eats strategy for breakfast. The culture in UNICEF is decentralization. The culture is really being led by the country level. The fact that we have any engagement with countries and they want to do this really shows that if they see a value add in this type of engagement. Okay, so that's where we're coming from. Let me tell you a little bit about what we do. So we do research embedded within programs, and we have 3 kind of main principles that we do when we build this implementation research programs. The first principle is we let implementation lead. And what I mean by that is that we engage really closely with our country office colleagues, with our national staff, as well as with the ministries and different partners that we have in the field, to make sure that we're building research that fits their program, not trying to make their program fit the research that we want to do. And I think that's important because a lot of times our staff and country, they feel pressured that, okay, we need to show impact right now, when maybe it's not the right time for them to be running an RCT or an impact evaluation. So we really try and build together with them in a co-creation approach. These are the questions that you want to answer, and a lot of times that's about fidelity of implementation. And this is how we're going to measure that and try and get there. The second main principle that we have is that we use and improve data that's already collected as a first point of contact. So the first question that we ask when we go into some of these meetings are, what's the data that's already collected within the system? There's so much data that's collected by education systems every day that sits unused. A lot of times it's being used for regular monitoring. How do we use that data and improve those systems that are being collected at the district level, at the school level, for actual learning, and not just monitoring or put into some report that goes to UNICEF or SCDO or whatever at the end of the day. And then the third major principle that we work with is that we put the focus on sustainability. So one of the things that we really try to encourage is when we go in and we're working with one of our country teams, is we're trying to build the capacity of our country colleagues to do some of this analysis, to really think about how they engage in data and the use of evidence at a country level. And then we also put a really big focus on learning about how things are going on in the classroom. So looking at the quantitative side, but also the qualitative side, because the how is really important. So that's 1 minute left. So let me tell you about a little bit about where we're wanting to go. So we've done this research in a number of different countries, and we want to continue supporting this. And what we're doing with the support of the hub is we're placing regional education research positions within 3 of our key regions. Marco, some of you might have met today, is our education research specialist that's based in West and Central Africa. We're going to be having positions that are in East and Southern Africa, as well as in South Asia. And the idea is for those folks to be a real point of contact for our country office colleagues. They're doing a new program with the government. There's a large-scale program that's going on. There's somebody to engage with them at the regional level to support building research and evidence throughout the entire process. So that's what we're working on. Thank you.
Okay, questions, quibbles, comments? Judith, yeah. Thank you very much. You talked about vast runs of unused data. Are they focused on particular themes? Are we carrying on globally collecting data on issues that actually nobody needs or are interested in, or are they just too tricky to build into analysis or to use constructively?
I think there's 2 things. I think one thing that happens is that there's a local education group and everybody decides that they want to get their own indicators for their own reporting. And I think that's a major challenge for people in the field. And I think a second thing is that a lot of people think about, and this is I deal with a lot, countries where they really have a focus, like we want to do this, do the good formative assessment system. They build out the system, maybe they have an app for it, but then they haven't planned out fully how they're actually going to use that data going forward. So I think a lot of it is in, like, we're asking too many questions, we're asking people to do a lot. And then a lot of it is just in terms of like the actual processing and use of it. And I'll give you an example that we've had programs where, you know, we're going into the field and basically going with district officers to collect some of the data that they're meant to collect, and it's a long list of things. Even just supporting and improving the template that they use to collect that data makes their job easier and allows them to do all the other stuff that they're actually supposed to be doing, and then also allows us to analyze and use that data better and more quickly.
I think this is such an important point, right? So I went to visit in Ghana. The district official said, I have 5 different assessments being done by 5 different programs. I am trying to rationalize it. This is our problem. It's not government buy-in, it's not government demand, it's our problem, and we're creating the problem. The other point about, so in another country, Malawi, when I went, the official had an app, and I was like, I'm going to use this app that you're using to monitor implementation. 100% of those things were ticked yes.
Yeah.
Was there any learning happening in the classroom? So we are collecting lots and lots of data. We're collecting it, I think, properly for researchers and our own M&E systems, and it's really not contributing to improvement. So that was my comment. A question was, I would love to know the kind of data that you're coming up with that links to mathematics, in particular, but we could do
Great. Okay, maybe one more. Yeah, Maria.
I was just wondering how you envisage the collaboration between the 3 new researchers, the regional ones, with your local offices, but also with local other partners. Like, for example, are they going to work primarily as like demand driven, and are they also able to work, or can the other partners also come and say, oh, can you help us?
I mean, I think it's going to be, and we've already, you know, spoken to some of our colleagues from the British Council. I mean, I think what we envision for these regional roles is really that they are supporting, first and foremost, our country offices, but also our focal points for the hub and the different partners. Because really, regional roles are supposed to be coordinating all the different activities, and the different activities at country level is everybody in this room, and at regional level, it's everybody in this room, and at the global level, it's everybody in this room.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, and we'll have time to come back to everyone collectively.
I have a presentation.
Yes, yeah, I think they're loading it.
Yeah, so maybe what, so today I'm going to talk about the IIP's research on the middle tier, and very specific one, but just want to highlight that we work in also many countries for supporting education sector analysis and planning, and last year alone, we worked in 58 countries and producing 26 ESP. So we've been working a lot at the central level, also the decentralized level last 20 years. And so for us, the middle tier focus is not new, and I'm super excited that I'm able to talk about it today in front of the. Okay, so my name is Suguru Mizune. I'm leading the technical cooperation team. And the middle tier is quite important because we talked about that all policies are not informed by the evidence, but evidence also don't get to the classrooms. And the innovations at the classrooms face challenges to get scaled. And the first barrier would be the middle tier. Right? And the middle tier has been quite under-researched and also the neglected in education studies in the past for different reasons. And one of the reasons is that middle tier is so fragmented, underdeveloped, or outdated and under-resourced. So make it very difficult to analyze a middle tier in a systematic way. So what are we going to do, or what we have been doing is try to apply the system capacity approach to it. And the reason is because we need a comprehensive way to analyze middle tier as a system, as a whole. So that is, and for that purpose, the system capacity analysis is a very good approach to do it. And why it's important? Because the the addressing learning poverty, for example, requires work at the level above the classroom, and which is middle tier. And then there has not been a concerted effort to understand what's happening there. Middle tier has been a black box. We don't know many things about it. How many people hire, how they are hired, how they are trained, and how do they drive the learning practices at the school level. We don't know so many things. And so we've been working in the middle tier, this specific research in 5 countries that we are with OECD, Kenya, Pakistan, and we will start in the Guyana as well as Kyrgyzstan in partnership with FCDO, What Works Hub for Global Education, Learning Generation Initiative. And we have very specific research questions. For example, how the design of the middle tier is going to influence their leadership in teaching and learning, etc. So the approach we use is the mixed method approach. We study documentations about the TORs of the offices, TOR of the individuals, what they are supposed to do, what are the regulations, which defines the relationship between the middle tier and the central level, as well as the school level. We conduct the quantitative analysis and by collecting data about the middle tier. And also the main part of it is the qualitative research and interviewing all the middle tier officials, as well as the school leaders, teachers, as well as the provincial level officials. And then if allowed, data is allowed, then we will analyze the workforce database here. And we have 4 broad categories of the domains that we want to look into. The first category is to see if the institution is designed to fit for the purpose. The second category is about the workforce, their motivation and competences. And the third area is about data availability and the use of data and evidence. The fourth category is the learning culture. So what are the what kind of professional development plan do they have? Would they be able to learn from other districts? For the best practices, would they be able to provide the instructional leadership based on the research, etc. And I will give you, I have 1 minute, so I will give you a very quick sneak view of the Pakistan results. So basically, this is saying that the main question is that do you understand the role of your office and your own role, right, as an officer? And then what we see is a huge and consistent variation between male and female workers.
Women are more honest.
So the gender matters quite a lot. And so use of data. So what we see is a huge variation regarding the purpose of the use of data, and also the between the provinces. And this is Pakistan, so there's no wonder, but there's bigger discrepancies than I thought. And thirdly, these are input resources. Okay, do they have resources for their school visit, yes or no? And that kind of even simple, the minimum kind of requirement for them to visit schools is varying quite a lot across offices. And then this is a summary, just 1 minute, and a summary of the qualitative analysis. And maybe I want to invite you for the last part. So current skill set for the middle tier education managers barely correspond to their tasks related to the use of data at all. So the capacity gap is huge. So we can't expect they use data and support schools with given the workforce we have in Pakistan. So next step, we will produce the IIP-LGI position paper with soon. Then the country report will yet to come. And then we are looking for resources for the Balochistan province in Pakistan because we couldn't cover it, but it's quite important. And publish a conceptual framework and also methodology as a global public goods under the What Works Hub. Thank you very much.
Great. Yes.
Great, thanks so much. This is so interesting. I think lots of the research from some of the learning at scale work on structural pedagogy and also kind of teaching at the right level just shows how crucial the middle tier is in providing some support on, especially around coaching. And I think lots of us that are implementing those programs really rely on those mid-tier officials to do that, but it might not necessarily be in their job description because it's been like added on, and they've got, like you said, they've got so many other roles, responsibilities. So I just wondered, have you been looking at that as part of this research as well, like their role in in supporting
Yes,
kind of instructional leadership?
Yes. So we look at the different roles, including instructional leadership, roles related to budgeting and financing, and role related to the HR, etc. So we do pay attention to the other instructional leadership as well. And also we want to look at the case loads. So the TORs, maybe they are already, but is it realistic for us to expect them to deliver?
Yeah.
So, and to kind of answer that question, we also want normally get the data about the distribution of the EOs. Do they allocate district officers according to the size of the schools or the student numbers that they need to serve? Is it systematic? Do they have like over? So that distribution is also an issue. So like we want to look at the system level, the bottlenecks for them to take not new, but the roles to support schools. And I really want to understand what are the system level bottlenecks for them to support schools.
Great. I think often there's also these distortions with donors who end up paying some of the transport to do certain things, and that ends up then changing what they do in practice. So it's super interesting research. Thank you.
Any other? Oh, okay. Maybe one last one. Yeah, Rebecca.
Okay, two-part question. I'll try to make it brief. One is, how are you thinking about, or are you thinking about socializing these results with policymakers, like about their own structure, and how you're sort of thinking of approaching that? The second is, are you looking into positive deviance, like in particular cases, maybe for some reason, mid-tier is actually functioning a lot better, and why is that happening? What can be learned from that?
Answer is yes and yes. And so for example, in Kyrgyzstan, the government is implementing the decentralization reform, and education is part of it. So what we are trying to do is like how they could best reorganize district offices, and not just number of district offices, the TOR of the offices. So what normally we do is really align with the government planning. And the positive deviance, yes. And so there are many ways to look at, identify specific districts. So the positive deviance, definitely yes. But I would say there's so much you can do with the data. So I think it's really important to have, to create opportunity for other partners and other researchers to get into the data so they can do different types of the research using that data.
Thank you. Yes, wonderful.
Okay, I'm gonna have to stand here so I can see this. Okay, so the Gates Foundation is new to the sector. We've only team's been 6 years now. We're a very small team. We were four at the beginning of the year. We're now 8, but that gives the opportunity for us to be scrappy and to be riskier in our investments, to really think about what's needed and how we can support what's needed. I think I think it was Rachel who said to me about that you're a technical partner. And I was like, what does that mean, a technically focused partner? And then we had a question from the co-chairs that went to the US team, which was like, why is 2-digit subtraction such an issue in the United States? And so that's what we mean about technical, that we will then look at that question and then think about how to address it. So we think about, or I think about education reform as political, logistical, and technical and pedagogical. And I think we don't separate out the logistics of large-scale reform enough. And when we don't think about them in those buckets, we might miss out what's needed in the pedagogy and the logistics and the political side. I think you might be familiar with going through a strategy evolution process, and somebody asked, does that mean you're not going to be on FLN? I was like, no, don't even think that. We are still going to be on literacy and numeracy, foundational learning, but we're also going to bring in the numeracy side more. So we have an innovation agenda, and to be very frank with you, I think sometimes in global education, the innovation agenda is the application of common sense as opposed to very radical innovative things. And the focus is going to be on literacy, On numeracy, bringing up numeracy more so that the evidence base is on par. And thank you to USA for the work you've done on literacy already. On education technology, I am surprised I haven't heard artificial intelligence and large language models this morning, but how does that serve the teaching and learning agenda rather than a standalone? So the collaboration with FCD on the EdTech Hub has been very useful, but how do we take that forward? The language of instruction issue, everywhere we get heard about the language of instruction issue. So what is the evidence-based and research-based? What is the public goods that can serve that agenda? And also, what about the foundational literacy and numeracy in the upper grades? We also have demonstration countries and we have this, but can we show when you apply the evidence, does it work? And so India has been our flagship program. We had midline results in, which is very interesting. And I forgot to bring that page over. I want to read some of the research because I think it's really important that we think about what kind of research advances the sector. So just 3 points. Assessment was typically conducted by teachers and found to be helpful in determining students' learning. However, there was a lack of clear remediation plans. That more teachers use student workbooks to teach rather than the teacher guides, and that teachers largely regarded the mid-level officials' feedback as generic and ineffectual. These are not surprises, but let's build on that to say what are the research agenda and what is the perhaps innovation to make an impact on that. Okay, 1 minute, 39 seconds left. So I'm going to build on the points that we had earlier on, teaching and learning. Really, we've got to think about, we will be thinking about what does literacy and numeracy mean for the same teacher using the same kind of resources and for the same students. What is, getting geeky and technical, what are the key learning objectives children need to master? And how do we measure that in a way that is easy for the teacher to use and then inform her instruction? We don't talk about cognitive sciences and sciences of learning in the sector as much as perhaps we need to. So what does it mean to have that agenda inform implementation? The second bit is about, and I talked about this earlier, research that shifts the needle. So when we heard about Malawi's results of nearly 2 standard deviation impact, what will we like? How do we help? How do we work with you to say what would 0.5 standard deviation impact look like? What would 1 standard deviation impact look like? And so the research questions arising perhaps is to do with attendance. Like, oh, okay, but maybe it's also about this in this area for these groups of children versus those groups of children. RCT is helpful, but honestly, what does it mean to be 0.2? What does it mean in terms of percentage of children who are now acquiring mastery over objectives? And so we want detail on not just the what's happened, but why it happened, how it happened, and what needs to happen next. Government uptake is really important, and it is focused on thinking about the middle tier as the implementing arm, as part of the implementation team. And some really interesting work happening in India with Central Square Foundation and Language and Learning Foundation on this. Final 2 points, I'm going to go back 30 seconds over. The Global South, right? We have to put our money where our mouth is. We have to go beyond saying, oh, it's a nice thing to do and we're going to try. So some of the investments that we have are 11 African organizations on education. What do they need to have greater revenue? That's a business lens, it's a very different lens. What is it they need to get greater revenue, impact, and reach? The work of ESSA, the work of the SSA EdTech Fund we've just recently set up. My final point is inadequate outcomes. In Ofsted, would generally mean inadequate leadership. And so when we look at what we are trying to do, how is it that that inadequate goes from grade 4 at the moment to grade 3 to grade 2 to grade 1? But 9 out of 10 children can't do literacy, and 8 out of 10 can't do math and numeracy. That's clearly inadequate outcomes. Thank you.
Any questions or, that's for Asia. Yes, questions.
Just two comments that are linked. One is, it was really great to hear you mention language and education and how the impact that has on foundational learning, because I think it often gets forgotten. And I know that the World Bank has done a fantastic report around that. We are very engaged in it. UNICEF does great work around it. And it brings me to my second point, which is coming back to what we discussed on this table. And I think others have also been saying, I think it would be really helpful to be able to describe the work that we're doing in kind of thematic areas under that umbrella of foundational learning. Because that's how we can start to organize what we're doing. Otherwise, foundational learning, I think, is too broad. So I just wonder if there's a way that we can do that collectively.
I think we should make that as an action point. My colleague will be leading on that work, but it applies to many things. And that's what I meant about the excitement this morning, which is we're seeing the dots. Now, how do we come together and really produce things that have common vocabulary and a common approach, but they're really localized and contextualized. So every.
Yeah, I just wanted, we were talking about kind of challenging each other's kind of opinions earlier, and you talked about Gates kind of being quite new and obviously being a bit scrappy and a bit risky. And I wondered if you could kind of share any of the kind of riskier decisions you might have made to maybe challenge some of the perceptions in the room.
I think one is in India, I use the word in India, all our partners are the implementers, the researchers, the consultants. And the way we worked is very different. Somebody said to me, I didn't even know you could get this in India. I'm like, good. Because we're not the ones doing the work. The work is being done by our partners. What is our role in supporting and enabling partners to do that work? And thinking of the funder, but actually being a critical friend to our partners and putting in that pedagogy. They were talking about, the logistics. Like, it's not a good use of my time to talk about books being delivered on time. That's a delivery logistical issue. They'll sort. And so I think that's one. The other one is the program I just mentioned, DARA, and it's very, very proud of it, my bucket program, which is how do we really co-create? And when we had these one-to-one interviews with the African education partners, when I said co-create, you should see the body language. They have heard that word and they know it doesn't mean co-create. So when they were asking me questions like, I don't know, what's the theory change? You're going to come up with it. What's the timeline? You're going to come up with it. What's the focus? What's the curriculum? You're going to come up with it. That is very, very unusual. And I think perhaps we are a little bit more upfront and direct about the issues, and perhaps don't do the very English thing of saying, how do you think about it? No, the assessment issue is a mess in many countries. 5 different funders funding 5 different things. And to be able to say that and have our senior leadership team talk about that is also a little bit riskier. But I think the most powerful thing is that we can lean into other programs like our work with FCGO on the EdTech Hub, the accelerator on the World Bank. It's the leverage point about we can really be creative in saying, okay, what is it that you as large funders perhaps are not able to do? And that we can come in and we can go back to our leadership and say, actually, that didn't work. It's okay. And they'll accept that.
Thank you. Yes.
I do actually have some slides.
One of my options.
Yeah, they're coming. But just to say, I'm talking about something that's already been mentioned multiple times. So very excited to dig in a little bit deeper, as much as the 5 minutes allows. Yes, I'm going to talk a little bit about our common measurements. We've heard this in multiple places. It's I would say it's still early stage, but kind of like everything in the hub is still a bit early stage, right? But we've actually been starting to make some real progress on this over the last couple of months. So excited to share a bit about it. So we have ambitions of developing some common measurement tools in at least 3 areas to start with, but the potential to kind of grow beyond those. So we're going to start with implementation, we're going to start with learning, we're going to start with cost, and then with a few aims in mind. So the first aim is to increase the measurement and reporting of these things in comparable ways in research studies, because we're a research and policy program, but we lead research, and we have a big research consortium. But we do have broader ambitions for it as well. So to also facilitate the uptake and use of these among practice and policy contexts as well, and all keeping kind of the end goal in mind, all with the goal of kind of creating or facilitating this more comprehensive understanding of improving foundational learning. So that's always the North Star that we're aiming for. And Yes, so implementation measurement, I think this is the one that I know I'm kind of most excited about because it's the most kind of blank slate that we're working from. We're building on the kind of health literature and some things around how to measure implementation in public health, building on, of course, existing things, but there's not really a good sense and definition even of this one in the education space. So we want to work to institutionalize a standardized approach or approaches to measurement and reporting of implementation in education. And there's a few reasons why we think this is really important, which I think is very shared in this room, but things like being able to explain variation in program effectiveness. So, if we see there's a lot of variation, is it because the design varied or is it because it's just being implemented to different degrees? Like we really need to understand this so we can figure out what's behind maybe the monitoring data that we have. On the research side, explain null results. Was the program design not the right design for achieving the intended outcome, or was the design like kind of perfectly adequate? It just wasn't really implemented in the end. And then the kind of North Star for this one is to try to catch implementation failures in time to course correct. So to get to the point where we're also doing some of these in real time, that is ambitious, but we want to get there, and especially in the practice and policy side of things to be able to kind of course correct as we implement and roll things out. We want to take a practical, simple, parsimonious approach. There are versions of this that become like very extensive and comprehensive, and there's a place for that, but that's not what we're going to aim for. We're going to aim for something that's quite actually containable, so that we can get people to use it. If you make it too big, it just doesn't get used. If you make it too small, it doesn't capture what we need. So we're going to try to find that the sweet spot in the middle, but leaning towards simple. We're going to focus on a few measures, take up fidelity and compliance, and definitions for those are still kind of being worked out, but I'll give some examples. And then lastly, we want to take a modular approach. So we're going to create kind of a bit of a tool that can be kind of slotted into other systems or that can be adapted for different programs. So here's maybe a core set of measures, and then you could add some more on for a structured pedagogy program. Here's a core set of measures, and you can add some on for a Toral program or et cetera, but a modular approach that could be adapted. So just a few examples, because I feel like we talk about things, but it stays kind of abstract. So a few, especially on the fidelity side, some examples, but for take up, we want to define it as the number of children that are benefiting. This is a bit of a stance that we want to take. You could define it in different ways, but like, let's see if we can get to a place where we're measuring take up as like, the children are there and they're receiving what was intended to be received. For fidelity, like I said, these are some examples of kind of what a relative fidelity measure would be. So how many hours were planned and then how many were actually delivered? Can we see if what was intended was delivered? How many physical inputs were planned? How many were delivered? Did they actually reach where they were supposed to be? There's also a version of fidelity that takes a bit of a more of an absolute stance. Like, do we have the evidence on how many training sessions teachers should have? And is that what's being applied? We think we can only get there with kind of a certain set of types of programs where that evidence is strong enough to take a stance on exactly what's needed to achieve effectiveness, but we might get there as well. And then I won't have time to get into learning measurement in detail, which was kind of to be expected, but just to say we also want to take some of the same principles apply of taking a kind of a simple, pragmatic, and parsimonious approach to learning. Again, this is a more established space, the world of learning assessments. We have no intentions of reinventing the wheel. We're not an assessment team. What we want to do is build on what already exists to see if we can get to like a right-sized module to address a few specific things, one of which we heard come up. But we do all this reporting in like scores, indices, and standard deviations. We want to get to something where we're reporting on proficiencies. Can children subtract? Can they do addition? Can they do division? So that we're comparing actual things. And also because those are also more actionable measures. So if you know that, you know what to do. If you know they improved by 0.2 standard deviations, you're like, great, like what do we do next? It's less informative in that sense. So to get to measures that are more informative. And also on this one, a modular approach can be slotted into existing assessments. It's not trying to be everything. And I'll just say, we want to build on, we're going to align to the global proficiency framework. We want to build on all of that work. We're going to try to grab items from things that exist. So the AMPL or the ICANN assessments, for instance, it could be others, and build on what's there. And with that, I'll just say we're going to do a sequenced rollout, as we've heard already. So I don't even need to make this point, but we're already hearing lots of demand from partners. So we're very excited about that. We heard that from, our UNICEF colleagues, the World Bank colleagues, et cetera, and many others as well. So lots of interest. We're going to start with hub partners, get lots of feedback as people start using them, and then ultimately roll it out with bigger ambitions, especially kind of on the implementation side, because it's such a new thing, to see if we can get that institutionalized in some of the kind of the JPAL or the World Bank worlds, where these things kind of have a filter on effect. It's a bit on our measurement work.
More questions or thoughts for Michelle? So let's see, I'll try to take it, Amy.
Thank you, that's really helpful. I'm also really interested in the tools for synthesis as well. Are you able to share a little bit about what those might be so that we're, able to communicate in a common way, a clear way, the synthesis as well as the primary?
Absolutely, yeah. So we have, it's a great question, thank you for that. But we have I have a synthesis conceptual framework that's going to be coming out soon. That'll kind of like lay out an ambition for what we want to do, and it maps our work streams to that framework. So it'll kind of show how that is being actualized in our work planning. But in terms of specific tools, I might park that one and come back to you. So we can talk about the primary research, but yes, I know that you and I need to talk about this more.
You listed three things: cost, learning, and implementation, and there are frameworks that FCDO has signed on to. So I just want to flag, I think how you define the we really needs to be early on, right? Consultation. So I think sharing frameworks that then we have to reconcile later is inefficiencies that we're creating that we don't need to, right? So I think just to flag that. On learning, there's also a massive undertaking right now across all the test developers, including regional assessment. So how do we actually talk about their proficiency? So what you guys might represent is a really agile way to test some of that, because you've got researchers that are really, doing the work. The research, you have the capacity at that level to be good consumers of how do you take the Haldo and the EGRA and and make it work for something? So that might be a really unique space that you could play. So just yeah.
Yes, just a shout out to say, share the frameworks, all the frameworks.
Yeah, send them our way. We'll take them. Happy to align. And we're very synced up with our FCDO colleagues on cost in particular. Simon, you're leading some work on that. So very synced up on the FCDO side, synced up with kind of all the efforts that B2 has done, of course. So like I said, we want to build on what's there, but we do see a space for this kind of right-sized, simple one that builds on it, but that is maybe quicker and easier. I like your word agile, actually. Maybe more agile, and again, to kind of start with the research community and then build out from there.
I had 2 points. One was, could we go back to the slide where you were talking about the implementation fidelity measurements? I think this is really helpful, but the bit about the quality is missing. So if we take the equivalent of health, and you'd be like, we're going to inject people, and the first thing was, well, what's in the injection? And we don't ask that in global education space. So if you don't have a focus on quality and you get 100% implementation, you might not get improvement. So I think there is a mechanism, something to think about there. As is this teacher training evidence-based in what we know about adults learning, and is this book's the right things? And then the second slide, I thought was really helpful, that you're breaking down the assessment into this short, sharp, succinct global proficiency linked to the global proficiency. And I think that kind of more agile, more frequent, more localized, that links to what the middle level official should have the data more frequently to act on, will be really important. So it's good to see that.
Yeah, and on the fidelity, agreed. So in our longer version of this, we actually have diagrams, pictures, of course, but where we map out where you would measure fidelity, and then you would measure take up. We say learning outcomes, because we want to be on every slide that's a part of, and so that does come into are we doing the right things?
So I think slightly different point is, what's the quality of the inputs? It's not just the textbooks everywhere. Would this textbook work with even one child? Or worksheets? And I think that's a really important.
Thank you. views. We're gonna have to pause unfortunately, but thank you, Michelle, thank you, everyone. We do now have 10 minutes for kind of a broader group reflection before we get some comments from discussants. So we can either keep riffing on this because I see there's still some hands, or now feel free to ask anyone anything. So this is an open space for 10 minutes around all the presentations, all the topics that have come up. So we can also continue on this measurement or broaden out beyond. So yeah, any and all hands. Thoughts, comments? Yeah.
I'd love to hear about how you bring in the research expertise in from your target geographies into some more of this cross-cutting work so that really the plumbing and the theoretical underpinnings have contributions and are led by researchers from those geographies, and that they're not just kind of in their box focusing on the countries.
Yes,
Yeah.
any other?
So I mean, and maybe to speak to that just briefly, but like, yes, fully agreed, super aligned on that one. And I didn't mention it here, but like another, we're gonna roll out our consortium, which is actually kind of deeply embedded in the countries where they're doing the research. So we have that. We also want to roll it out maybe in a second stage to our community of practice, which gets a lot. I mean, we have over 100 organizations, the majority of which are based in the Global South in our community of practice. It's a really engaged group. And they are also very keen on these things. And then that one leans practitioners, but also has researchers and funders that are a part of it. And that will be another way that we can kind of really, and the first stage will be very much kind of seeking feedback on how well they're working and workshopping them together. So yeah.
Yeah, Luis.
I have questions for you guys. From the hub's perspective, what are some of the coordination failures that you're thinking about? I mean, this is a big group of organizations doing all kinds of stuff all over the place. That, you know, just for us to bear in mind. And are there maybe some lessons from RISE, which was structured in a similar way?
I can try. I mean, I think the coordination is the goal of the room, so I won't, pretend to know, have solutions. I would say, I do think that leaning towards concreteness is one principle. So I think we can all get really lost in kind of trying to coordinate on a very abstract level. And what are you thinking? How are you thinking? And so like one thing that I'm keen on, and I know we're working on, is like, and what are the concrete touch points? So for instance, the measurement is a concrete touch point. Like if folks in this room want to take it up, we can co-create it together. Like I said, we're very open to input and feedback on it, and kind of have it be a tool that we're all kind of coordinating around, as like one example. And so other places where kind of like the intellectual framework is another kind of concrete point. Like, can we map the decode studies that are going to happen to that framework and kind of have a comprehensive view of how we're starting to fill it out, where the remaining gaps are, things like that. So I do think like one principle would be concreteness, and actually not to get too caught up in spending all of our time trying to coordinate at like a very abstract level, but try to get coordinated at a concrete level.
Yeah, and would also throw that back to everyone
for
ideas on how to do that well.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for opening that up. I think your point about concreteness, like we can collaborate on things, we know what we're doing together, is a really good one. I also think somebody needs to think about, and maybe it's this group, the structures for coordination. I'm not sure. I mean, I know there's the board, I know there's the strategic partners, but I'm not sure that that's the structure that will allow us to do that concrete working together. Instead of just saying, hey, you can join us, we're going to roll this out. You can join us. But there needs to be some real structure for doing the work.
Are you envisioning, Rebecca, like a technical working group type structure?
Pretty much.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, Tom.
Yeah,
just want to reflect also on something that I think Lucy was talking about in terms of, and it was something that I was speaking with somebody at dinner yesterday. No, sorry. So basically, I think there's a lot that's like, this is a great conference, and there's a lot that's learned by all the people in this room. I think that there's a similar type of conference that you could have that would be talking all about the exact same subjects, but with probably a lot of a different focus. If you brought all the field RAs that work on all the different research programs into a room and talk about like, okay, all this stuff that all these PIs thought about, how did that actually go out in the field? And I think that, I'm biased, I was a field array back in the day, but I think that that's something that we sometimes, and I really like the focus on measurement because, I mean, at the end of the day, it's measurement is what matters and how you're going into the field. And what really matters in that is how well can somebody that's going out in the field actually interact with these people and do it. And I think a lot of times we kind of yada yada over that stuff in the design wasn't super great or whatever. But what it comes down to at the end of the day is how well does that design actually lead to somebody going out in the field and doing it. And so I would encourage, and maybe I'm just on my soapbox, I would encourage the next one of these types of conferences, maybe we bring a lot of these people from the field also to have this honest and a safe, or maybe it's an online thing, whatever, a safe conversation between people to talk about what were the actual real challenges trying to implement all this stuff.
We should bring in our own middle tier into these.
I think it's important.
I wanted to go back to Lucy's point about how our global South researchers involved from the beginning, from the point zero, not as a feedback, but in that creation, in that leadership. And I think there needs to be a very strong focus and an understanding of what it means to consult versus what it means to lead. And that's part of our collaboration with What Works Hub has it called out as a specific outcome. And I think it would be really good to see a very strategic and potentially impactful plan on how that will happen.
I think in answer to your question as well, Lewis, is I think where we've also got lessons, I think we've got lessons from RISE, but I think we also have some really good lessons from the Building Evidence and Education group. Actually, you're obviously part of the early stages of helping with that vision, and it would be interesting to hear from Maria a couple of lessons, because I've been really impressed by the creation of some global products within that group, where you have got, there's been small technical groups, but then you've taken that to, the committee and the board for everyone to sign off, and it's been, those guidance have been signed off at the highest level of every one of those member organizations. That's quite an achievement to do that efficiently. How have you done it? And if, for example, on cost effectiveness, say, are we all going to commit to improving what we already have and doing an updated version, rather than, we've got a new network, so now let's just create another one under that. So what is genuinely new that should be under What Works Hub on implementation science perhaps? And what actually is a refresh of what we've already done and already thought about, but we might want to refresh, so that we're not reinventing wheels. But I'd love to hear any, a couple of lessons on how that's been done, because.
So I think what has worked, and we've had, different ways in which we have produced the B Square guidance notes over the years. We've changed. So I think what has worked best is that we had an expert consultant that really helped us pull the things together. And then we had a group of member representatives that were experts in that field, but they were not responsible for the writing. They were responsible for providing input. And I'm talking about creating something from scratch. So I'm not talking about kind of editing or leveraging existing ones, which I think would be perhaps a slightly different approach. And then, we had about a year of reviews through CIES, through ACFIA, through the member organizations, and then kind of the agreement and the top level sign off. I think one of the things that in our Square group, we were on Monday that we discussed is the uptake and how we can increase the uptake. And so that's why we were talking about perhaps simplifying it, but just going back and saying, what is it that would increase the uptake of not necessarily this guidance note, but cost guidance, and working with a much broader group, not just our members, but obviously What Works Hub, but also like IPA and JPAL and organizations that also have big research portfolios and have already done also guidance in that area. So I think that was some of the vision.
Any last? Yes, sorry, done.
Was there someone else?
I was looking, but I don't think so, so yeah, done.
One thought was on the country level of the discussions, I think, there were a few things that were being talked about, of how is this all adding up in each of the different countries where we're all. There are a few countries where we're literally throwing everything at it at the moment. Thinking of Ghana, where probably I don't know, a large subset of everyone here is working there. And so just one, and this is not an answer, it's more of a challenge of how do we use some of the really, heavy investments that are being made to try to piece things together in a very concrete way at the country level. So I do worry a little bit that we're now oversaturating some things to a certain degree too, which is that pendulum swinging back and forth, right? And how do we collectively, because we can't do that for every country probably. And there was a mention of a country TOC. I suppose that's a hub TOC. Then how do we make sure that some of the other things that are not squarely funded through the hub, I guess that's why we're all together, fit together and allow you to test some of the things that you guys are doing too, as kind of demonstrations of how might you do it, to leverage the fact that, well, UNICEF's there and you guys are there in the banks in Ghana too. How do we do that from within a country context? It's, I guess, an open question too. Yeah.
Great, well, thank you, everyone. We're gonna hear now from a couple of folks online, and then Sabina will bring it back to you to close us off as our final discussant. Kartik, are you there? Wonderful.
Yes.
Kartik, if you could do
Hello, everyone.
Thank you. Yes, you could do just a mini intro and then share any reflections from the things that you've heard. Feel free to give us homework too, things we should work on. And then we'll come.
Absolutely. It's been wonderful listening to all of you the last almost 4 hours now. And it's amazing that there's a camera that kind of zooms in on whoever's speaking. So I've actually gotten a bird's eye view of whatever's been going on and listening intently, and it's been quite amazing. So my name is Kartik. I'm from Pratham. As part of the What Works Hub, I don't know if we're an implementing partner or a research partner, because our PIs are the people who are actually implementing the program as well. So we have that unique opportunity to go deeper into what works in teaching at the right level. I think that was mentioned quite a bit today as well. Just 2-3 reflections on what a lot of people were saying, and I'll give you a disclaimer. This is only very India specific, because that's the experiences that I have. But one part was more around the creation of awareness about who is doing what and educating more people about it. And I think that's where a hub can play a very important role. Rachel had initially even mentioned about the community of practice that's been set up even in India, and we've seen that everyone's doing their own thing, but they're not necessarily interacting with one another. And we see that in India quite a bit. And I heard lots of common voices here, and we should go as a coalition, as a group. So how can we first educate, get people aware of what we're doing, and then potentially working together? Not compete, but collaborate is something that we are looking at. And I see a lot of USA, World Bank, UNICEF representatives here, but their India country offices perhaps should also be involved so that they also know what's going on, and we see a bit of a disconnect there. I think once the awareness is there, there's a big push on advocating at different levels, not only at the highest level, but at the middle level, and perhaps figure out a way where people in this room or the organizations collectively go to government and advocate. That's something that we haven't really seen as a coalition. Individual organizations do it, but as a complete group, how do we go about doing that? And finally, just a reflection on the work that we're doing and what works. A lot of it, I think Asya also mentioned, that we know teaching at the right level works, but what works within it? And we're hoping through the research that we do in the next 4 or 5 years, a lot of people actually mentioned it today, of going deeper into perhaps areas of language diversity, working with children with disabilities, role of technology, even low technology in a low resource setting. So all of these exploratory areas will come through the research that we do at the hub. So very excited to be part of it, and great to see that there's so many other people who are thinking on similar lines, and hope to kind of build on this collective energy. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Yes. And Kartik, I'm thrilled that you didn't place yourself in the bucket and you said you're both, because that's the whole point actually, is to bring these worlds together. So I'm thrilled that that's a great reflection. Rachel, you wanted to say something?
I just wanted to reply, Kartik, lovely to see you. I just wanted to pick up on your disconnect between the country offices, and I wonder if we should make a call to all of those organizations here who are on the board, and it also responds a bit to Asia's point, and ask them to send some communication to the country office about the program, because one of the challenges, and our friend there, Gary, is just too polite to say it, but one of the things that she's experienced is, that someone, the UNICEF rep or the World Bank rep might not know anything about the What Works Hub, and then it becomes very difficult for that join up at country level. So maybe in response to Kartik's disconnect, we can help a little bit start with that.
Thank you. And actually, UNICEF had already done a nice convening of country offices. We presented a little bit about the What Works Hub. That was a nice model with the bank a little bit. So that's actually something that started. We could continue to do. That's great.
And it goes back to the communicate, this table saying, you think that you've communicated, but it may not have been the person at that meeting, or you may need to communicate again. And yes, they went to that seminar, but they went to 10 others that month as well.
Great. Aga Khan Foundation, Bronwyn.
Thanks so much, everybody. I hope you can hear me all right. Yeah. So thanks very much for inviting me to this. And like Kartik, I really enjoyed actually being a bird's eye view over the past 4 hours. And there was just so much rich discussion that came out, not just the presentations, but actually being able to listen in a little bit to your table discussions and your own Q&A as well. So thank you so much. I wish I could be there in person with all of you. I'll only take a few minutes because I know it's between us and lunch. So I wanted to share just a few reflections, and I suppose actually I should introduce myself first. Sorry, you mentioned Noam. I'm from Aga Khan Foundation. My name's Bronwyn, and I lead the Schools 2030 program, which is a flagship sort of global education program implemented by Aga Khan Foundation, but involving a whole host of donors and other partners as well. So yes, I enjoyed a lot listening in today, and I wish I could have been there in person and be there for the whole What's Work Hub Global Education Conference. I had a few colleagues who were there and filled me in a little bit over the last few days. What I'd like to just share a few reflections. So the first one was one thing that was really, really great to see is how many of the projects coming out of this work are focused on teachers and teacher practices and teacher pedagogy and professional development. And it really feels like we've moved a lot in the past few years away from a research agenda that focused more on how to monitor teachers or how to teacher-proof education interventions into a really deeper understanding of how to work with teachers to improve teaching practices and to sort of understand what's working at classroom level through these implementation science methods and tools. I just want to gently encourage still all of the teams to really deepen that and to work alongside teachers to really listen to teachers and to understand the gaps that the teachers see in terms of understanding and evidence around what works, so that we can really make sure that the research and the initiatives are responding to those important classroom needs. My second reflection relates a lot to this, which is around the evidence uptake. And I think most of what we are talking about in evidence uptake today was around that research and policy intersection. But of course, research and practice is very important. And I know that did come up a couple of times. For example, Donica, you were speaking about that a little bit with the Ed Labs and really trying to think about how we're learning about what works in terms of pedagogy and how that's translated to classroom level as well as policy level. But I think we could do a lot more of this. And I was thinking when we were hearing from UNICEF colleagues, UNICEF Innocenti colleagues about the Data Must Speak research that's come out from UNICEF and Ascenti, and how important those findings have been for us at Schools 2030. We partner with That Must Speak in Tanzania on this work, and this has been so important for us at school level to understand examples of positive deviance around what's working. For example, the important role of teacher leadership, and being able to translate those findings and communicate them effectively at school level is really, really important, and something perhaps we need to spend a little bit more time on. That gets me to a third point, which is one thing that I think is really interesting about the What Works Hub, and that I didn't hear enough about, I don't think, is the value of it being a cross-country project. And I've seen and been a part of a number of different cross-country initiatives. And sometimes that's just a case of a project being implemented in several places to kind of extend its reach. And I think we can do more than that and really think about what is the value of working across multiple countries. What is the kind of cross-national learning that comes out uniquely from a project that's being implemented across a lot of different countries, even though education is such a sort of national and country contextualized specific endeavor. I'd love to hear more about that, and maybe as the program, evolves and grows and deepens, we'll be able to dig a little bit more into that transnational or cross-national learning. And then the final thing I just wanted to say was really to applaud all of the conversations that have been going on today around alignment. I know a lot of speakers were talking about the importance of aligning to government priorities and being really mindful of the way we're collecting and sharing evidence so that ministries aren't overwhelmed with so many white papers and so many recommendations. But what I really appreciated was how quite a few people in the room talked about the really crucial role of donors. And I know there are a lot of donor organizations in the room. And from my experience working inside and outside and around donor consortiums and donor partner groups, as I mentioned, the program that I lead is, it's a consortium of donors supporting that as well. I know that this is really, really hard work. And I know it's something you're saying you're going to speak about at your board, what is the sort of structures and systems to put in place to make that kind of collaboration and alignment work better. I think this is a huge challenge, but I really applaud the efforts of this group and networks like B Squared that are trying to harmonize donor priorities. I think that's a crucial step to make sure we're really making sure these initiatives are cohesive and having all the impact that they can. So thanks very much again for inviting me, and good luck with the remainder of your afternoon.
Great. So Pina, you were the last thing between us and lunch, so over to you to close us. Yeah.
Really clear. So, Rachel, do you want the theory of change?
Sure, I think it's coming up.
Okay.
We got the connector.
Oh, sorry. So
we have a fail-proof paper. Here we are. In case it doesn't
yeah,
work.
so I think Rachel was keen that we just kind of refresh everyone on, we do have a theory of change within What Works Hub for global education. And at the bottom, it kind of shows at the kind of output level, I guess the different activities that different partners in the room are involved in, that are contributing to the bigger outcomes and impact. So that is all in there, but I guess the challenge that we've all talked about today is the importance of coordination and making sure that actually those kind of activities do actually end up leading to outcomes. And there is a risk, and there is always a kind of risk of this, that those things won't happen. So kind of really challenging ourselves to think about how to do that is going to be really important. And I guess one takeaway from me, like we talked a lot about the need to coordinate across organisations, but actually, yeah, reflecting we need to coordinate within organisations as well. So under Judith's leadership, Emily and I actually work in a different part of FCDO to like the research and evidence division, where the What Works Hub is kind of based, but we're like really strongly linked. And so kind of the work that my team leads is on our bilateral implementation programs and kind of technical support to our country network. And then on Emily's side, she leads all of our kind of multilateral partnerships work and our external policy influencing work. And I think we have to really challenge ourselves to work even more closely with the What Work Hub colleagues to make sure that all of these things are linked up, so that all of those kind of the guidance notes, the global public goods, like that Michelle and the team are producing, are kind of informed by our bilateral country programs and then get used by our programs and likewise. And also, so they're influencing, the kind of work that Emily does at the, with the Global Partnership for Education, our other, work with the World Bank and so forth. So we really need to strengthen some of that. And I think, I also challenge the other organisations in the room that have this matrix approach to think about how we can do that kind of better as well. I think we also just talked a lot about country level coordination, because this is complicated at the kind of global level, but it's where the rubber hits the road is going to be at the country level. And when you're based in country, you already have challenges with coordination, and it's something that a lot of similar organizations, probably different people to everyone sitting in the room, some are the same people, we're dealing with this a lot through the Global Coalition for Foundational Learning, trying to improve how all of our kind of more big implementation programs work better together at the country level. But I guess there's this issue on the research side too, and how we can do that. So I kind of see a need for us to kind of get better thinking about that. And I guess through the What Works Hub, maybe through your pillar 3, your countries where you're going really deep, there's a way to challenge that. And then I guess just finally, so this is, we've got the theory of change up here now. This is the theory of change for the What Works Hub, but the What Works Hub isn't kind of absolutely everything. This is one big investment, it's one movement to improve learning at scale. But I think all of us in the room have got other big investments and work that we're doing to improve learning at scale. So I think we're all, when we're sharing, and it's sometimes hard to think how it all fits together, but it's because we have got lots of other things going on too that are feeding into this. So I think hopefully we won't overcomplicate things, because we are doing a lot of other things too. Not everything does need to fit in here, but it's getting that balance right. I'll stop there.
Yes. Thank you so much, Sabina. That's a great reminder to kind of, we work with governments and bureaucracies. We also a lot of us work within bureaucracies ourselves, and kind of how to make that all fit together. So thank you so much for those wise words. And with that, I would just say thank you, everyone. It was really great to dig into the specifics of what all the institutions are doing as it relates to some of these agendas. Try to think about the common threads, common links. So really excited to be on this journey together. And indeed, we are strategic partners. So thank you, everyone. And let's eat. Thank you.